Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app.
First Sentier Investors is a global asset management group managing $247.3 billion of assets as at 30th of September 2021. They have 17 independent teams operating across equities, fixed income, listed and direct infrastructure, and multi-asset, led by principles of responsible investment and stewardship. They are home to FSSA Investment Managers, an Asian and global emerging markets equities investor. Stewart Investors, a pioneer in emerging market equities and sustainable investing. And Real Index Investments, a systematic equities manager.
Look, today, strap yourselves in. It's Andrew Rocks here, and I've got the privilege of talking to one of the industry's larrikins, Dan Blatch, and known for many things, but most recently and quite professionally, winner of the IFA Risk Advisor of the Year Award. In fact, I was there, and at his speech, he said that this year they've paid a record number of claims, which is a constant reminder that perspective is everything, and that life is not a dress rehearsal. He went on to say, you don't know what's around the corner, so please go home and hug your loved ones tonight. Now, at the function, he probably fast-tracked that. I think he hugged about 20 people as he was leaving the stage. So he's a guy full of passion. Dan Blatch, welcome to the XY podcast.
G'day, Roxy. Thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
And what I thought I'd kick off with is a bit of a story of how you've come to be. You know, we've had quite a few people in the past who've gone down the psychology route, and they've come into financial planning. Makes a lot of sense. But just tell me about sort of what you did, what you studied, and what brought you into where you are now, and just a bit of that background of how you found your way into financial planning.
Yeah, thanks, Roxy. It's a great reminder, isn't it, really, that you know, a life by design rather than default is sometimes a bit tricky, and you've sort of got to let it run and take you where you want to go. It's interesting, good timing given the cricket season's just finished. I was never good enough as a cricketer, Roxy. I was really never good enough, let's face it.
Well, you could play for England, so there is hope.
I was going to start maybe 11 at England, but the reality was I just wasn't good enough. But I loved cricket, and I used to sit around with my old man watching cricket, and for ages you'd see in the dressing sheds there'd be this constant reminder of a guy, like always there, always in the sheds. And perhaps for our non-cricket fans, that guy was Errol Alcott, who for a long period was the Australian cricket team's physiotherapist. I think almost 2 decades, if memory serves me correct. I thought, okay, so you can be in around that energy and you can have your passion and love for cricket, but not necessarily be on the field. And I said to Dad, what does that guy do? And he said, he's a physiotherapist. I thought, wow, that's awesome. Physiotherapists just watch the Australian cricket team go around the world. This is amazing. I want to be an Australian. I want to be a physiotherapist. I remember in year 10, I did do some work experience as a physio, and the physios at that point in time, up at Lingard Private Hospital, actually at Newcastle, did a pretty good job on ensuring that I realised not all physios were sports physios, but I wanted to pursue it nonetheless, but didn't get the marks, Roxy. At the time, and I'm not quite sure where it is now, you needed some really high marks. I didn't quite get there. So a colleague of mine suggested you do occupational therapy, do really well in year 1, and then transfer over to physiotherapy, which is what I did. But I realised then in year 1 at university, life was bigger than school. I went to an all-boys school at High, and there were girls around, Roxy, and there was beer everywhere, and attendance was optional. And needless to say, I didn't get the marks to go over physiotherapy. So I finished my OT degree, did some great time at St. George Hospital, but pretty swiftly realised most physios and OTs do great work, but it's usually in a hospital setting. It's not with sports teams. So my dream of being in and around the Australian cricket team faded quickly. But what I did learn was that primary healthcare wasn't for me. I've got huge admiration for allied health professionals, but it just wasn't me. Someone suggested I go and work within CTP and workers' comp. And that was my first ever full-time paid job at QBE, where I was running claims, working with various stakeholders, injured and ill workers and members of the community who suffered from motor vehicle accidents, and trying to rehabilitate them and working with doctors and the likes. And so I got my first-hand sort of experience of working inside a large insurer, and also understanding what people in pain and people who've gone through a traumatic event are dealing with. So that was a really, really informative sort of part of my career.
And how long did you do that for?
Yeah, I was at QBE
on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, I was at QBE for a couple of years, and then, if I'm honest, Roxy, became a little bit jaded with the restrictive, at the time, workers' work cover legislation. Someone said, if you want to be more creative with your rehab using your OT skills, why don't you consider working in claims management of income protection? And I was a boy in shorts, Roxy. I didn't know what income protection was, and jobs were going at this large French multinational called AXA.
And just to date yourself, Dan, what year was that?
Oh, this is going back to 2001. Yeah. Right. So I just turned 40. So that was a while ago. But I really, really enjoyed my time at AXA. I learned all about all forms of life insurance lines. I understood what it meant to manage IP claims, from short claims to long tail claims, the role that allied health and rehab programs have within it. I learned about manufacturing product at the time. Steve Curry and a few other mentors of mine and I, we built AXA Elevate. So I understood the distribution channel back then of life insurance products. I worked with underwriters and understood the pain points that exist when actuaries are also pricing products. So it was a wonderful training ground for me.
And when you're working in AXA, were a lot of the other team members from a medical background or from an actuarial background, or sort of were you a different kind of an addition to the team?
That's right. Yeah, in the claims team at the time, I think there were a couple of other OTs and one other physio, and we would work closely with the chief medical officer. But yeah, allied health professionals within that environment were more the exception than the rule.
Right.
And it was just wonderful being part of such a big ship. You know, at the time, I was working under Adrian Emery, some sort of real champions of the time, Les Owen, and some various mentors of mine, Jack Harrop from Sun Life. And I just realised how the world of life insurance exists across different jurisdictions, how different markets are more advanced and mature than others. And I started helping advisors position protection to clients, and that was using my sort of allied health background. I knew the difference between, XYZ's definition of a heart attack, troponin levels. I remember presenting to a group of advisors one day talking about the benefits of pathological Q wave movements in a definition versus troponin discharges. And I actually knew firsthand, having worked at the St. George Hospital emergency discharge program, what it cost to amend a house when someone had a stroke, what it cost when someone was involved in a motor vehicle accident, the exact cost of that home modification or what it meant to their life moving forward gave me a wonderful insight into being able to price that. And
can I ask you, actually knowing the details of what the cost is to get the perfect outcome, how did it make you feel sometimes when you dealt with people who just didn't have the financial resources to kind of achieve what you wanted them to achieve? How did that make you feel?
Well, at the time, I didn't know anything about it. That's the thing, Roxy. I'd come from an environment in the hospital where I didn't realise you could protect yourself for these sorts of circumstances. I had absolutely no idea. So only when I began to embark on a career in advice, sitting on the client side of the table and specialising in this area, did I realise the benefit of transporting that risk to someone else. But when I was in it, I just didn't realise you had to rely on various Commonwealth and government subsidies.
So you're sitting there, you're teaching financial planners sort of the nuances, the medical nuances of the products that they're selling. And I suppose that's the old know your product rule. People are rolling in, they're grabbing their croissant, they're having their coffee, they're barely asleep, and you're entertaining them. What made you jump the fence?
Oh, it's a great question, because I think I'm hardwired to build assets. And I think in my heart of hearts, Roxy, that's why primary healthcare wasn't for me. I have a deep passion and empathy for people who've found hard times, but I just don't think I'm very good at being that person on the front line. And from a very early age, I was interested in building assets, and I was commercially minded. I've got a bit of a funny yarn. Yeah, my first ever job was selling ice creams at the Sydney Cricket Ground with an old mate of mine. And I just became drawn to that role because you were remunerated directly with your output. And so whilst I recognised early on in my career, you've got to earn your stripes and there is a role to earning a salary, what often stuck in the back of my mind was I was limited, or I had no control over my earnings, or someone else had greater control over my earnings and my REM than myself. So I became quite passionate about building assets. And in fact, in my 20s, I was frankly too bullish, Roxy. I had a number of failed businesses. One was a toy business that I desperately tried to make work. We drove a large bus called the Bilby bus around to childcare centres selling products, and had a few other failed businesses in my 20s. I was just so ambitious to build assets that crossing the bridge to deliver advice directly to Australians just seemed inevitable for me. But I was very fortunate, Roxy, to have the mentorship of Phil Young, a former AFA of the Year advisor winner, and all the specialists up at AFRM to provide me with lots of guardrails, mentorship and training along the way. And then I found my current partners today all the way back in 2011.
It's interesting that you mentioned mentorship. Having been in the industry some time yourself, there's a lot of people in XY are at one or both ends of the spectrum. They're either looking to give back and maybe give some of that great mentorship that they received, or they're young people just absorbing that, because history does repeat. And regardless of the changes in legislation and whatnot, the clients are still the clients. And what you're sort of articulating is that health doesn't sit around and wait for royal commissions. People continually are getting more diabetes. Apparently, that's got to do a fair bit with the guy at the SCG selling ice creams. But time will tell who's culpable for that. And there's a lot of other factors. So you mentioned a couple of mentors there. Was there any forums back 20, 25 years ago that really worked for you and maybe that are transferable to this day and age?
Really, it was. I'm more belly to belly, perhaps, than others, Roxy. I really live and breathe the human exchange. So sitting across the table from someone, pressing the flesh is really part of my DNA. So albeit slow, organic, and not exactly scalable, I still find to this day some of the more valuable meetings are getting around mentors and peers around a table, being vulnerable and sharing as much as possible. And I still stand by that today. We know this is a relationship game. It's sort of anchored in everything we do. And I just think the more of those mentors you can foster, even if it is more labour intensive, be prepared to have 1,000 coffees, was a saying my old mentor gave me in my 20s. And I just tried to take one thing out of every one of those coffees. So,
and I suppose looping back to when you jumped the fence, I'd be really interested to hear about the very first time you sat down and advised someone from the financial advice side rather than the health side, and how it made you feel. And I suppose, I don't know if you can remember back, and unpacking that meeting, but maybe you can you remember the granular of that, or just give me an idea of that? And what year was that, Dan?
Yeah, that was back in 2010-11, and that would have been in my capacity as an advisor at AFRM, a wonderful training ground, an excellent specialist business, and we'll touch on specialisation in a second, Roxy. But, Phil Young, Nick Hassley, Mark Hoskin, Dan Musumeci, Rob Bittnell, these guys are absolute guns of the risk world. Just learning off a series of people, different styles. Was a little daunting, of course it was. You need to transfer your skills to another area, but frankly, it was all sort of inside me. Just needed to be tailored to client language and ensuring that you capture that right for clients. But daunting, of course, absolutely.
And I think, I go back to my recollection and when I was doing life insurance, I was really playing catch-up football on the medical terms. That wasn't something that I was familiar with, my foundation learning. But I think back, and if someone such as yourself or someone from medical background had actually been talking to me about life insurance, just the level of reassurance that I would have had, did you find that you had a better level of positioning with people? That's the first question. And then, did you ever do investments where you were almost a fish out of water? So it was kind of like a double-edged sword. I'm potentially awesome, Mr. and Mrs. Client, this, but maybe I might have the imposter syndrome over there. Maybe take me through that, Dan.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I found myself perhaps oversharing to clients on various aspects. Another old mentor of mine, Chris Unwin, used to always talk about the miracle cover being trauma, and I do love that phrase, and I still do use that phrase today. And how when we were designing trauma back in the day, certainly when we built Elevate, it really is a product that targets three key segments, as you know, those conditions that affect younger lives, almost always born out of motor vehicle accidents, so severe burns, quadriplegia, paraplegia, et cetera, major head traumas. Of course, those conditions that are more targeted to older lives, dementia, Alzheimer's, blindness, deafness, et cetera. And of course, those conditions that we all know only too well, Roxy, that just don't discriminate: cancer, multiple sclerosis. So just paid an MS plan, unfortunately. Average age of diagnosis for MS for women in Australia is 31. And most people don't know this. So if anything, Roxy, I found myself a little bit going into too much detail. And an old mentor of mine said, you've got to make sure you disturb and reinsure when it comes to protection. And I guess one of my early mistakes was just too much disturbing.
Well, I've read a few sales books in my time, and there's a bunch of techniques for closing the client sale, in inverted commas, but, recanting into a pool of crying for half an hour must have been a really interesting one. It would have been quite the journey a lot of your clients would have had. And, being handed a tissue, as you've then said, would you like to come on board, is just something maybe that, we don't have enough time in today's session, but something you might want to put out as far as a technique. It could be your ticket to the game.
The funniest thing was all my mates would say I'm an overly optimistic, glass half full, energetic sort of kind of chap. I'm consider myself the luckiest man on the planet. Yes, here I am delving into rather serious, that sort of dire sort of discussion. But what I learned pretty quickly, to your point on, did you also do wealth? Yes, it's sort of in my early days, I dabbled in it and pretty swiftly realised it wasn't something I was passionate about, nor did I have the experience and skills to really, really believe that I was a guru in this space. And it was the timing was incredible, Roxy, because two of my old long-standing friends and mentors knocked on my door. Another business I sort of had a bit of fun in my 20s was I was trying to completely change the face of fan engagement of sport in Australia, and ran a pretty fun sort of fan engagement group and won a Guinness World Record, and ultimately in the end sold the solution to the National Rugby League. But I learned so many great lessons out of that, and I was sitting in the New South Wales Rugby League Club where one of my partners and I had a tiny office. It was more like a sort of clothes closet, and I got a knock on the door, and it was Angus Dockrell and Scott Douglas, some old mates of mine, my two current partners. And they firstly laughed at my setup because we were upstairs in the New South Wales Leagues Club with no windows or doors. But then second said, how are you going with this sort of fan engagement piece? And as much as I love my time in sports fan engagement, I pretty swiftly realised there wasn't a lot of money in it, and it was more sort of a passion and fun. And their timing was impeccable because those two are sort of leading wealth specialists. And they basically said, we've been struggling with protection. We need a guru like yourself. Would you entertain the idea of beginning some dialogue and beginning a partnership to help improve client outcomes?
So this is with IMFG,
That's right.
and you came on board 2011, and it'd been going a few years beforehand. Is that right?
Yeah. So another great story, because both Scott and Angus left IPAC under some wonderful mentorship. Paul Clitheroe, Aaron Abbey, learned some sort of wonderful skills and an excellent training ground. But again, pretty swiftly realised that it's tough on your own. Small business is tough. I was a minnow amongst giants in my sports fan engagement days, negotiating with the NRL around an arrangement to sell 18,000 tickets within an event that you're not the promoter of is a slight challenge when it's just you and a couple others. So I guess what I've learned is
that's a lot of people in trench coats out the front asking someone would they be interested in good seats. Did you have a Cockney accent? Because that's a lot of effort on that front. And maybe we'll come back to that, because I'm not sure how many guests in XY's history have got a Guinness World Record. But I'll let you keep going with how you evolved your current business, and we'll probably retouch on that because it's a cracker of a campfire story. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks. But the reality was Look, it's really daunting making the step to self-employment. It really, really is tough and tricky. Most business is fragile, Roxy, even big business. We've got countless examples of that, let alone small business. And part of the thing I loved about my time with Blatchy is we had a hell of a lot of fun along the way. And I stand by your opening of the fact that life isn't a dress rehearsal. You might not be here tomorrow. I see it every day of the week. So you've got to have fun along the way. And so when Angus and Scott knocked on my door, having tried to sort of go on their own, and they were running successful businesses at the time, but realised that we would be stronger together, and that coming together gave us an opportunity to stick to our knitting and stay in our lane in areas where, frankly, we were more comfortable and better suited, was a real eye-opener. But to do that, of course, you've got to find the right guys. And culture is everything, and shared values is everything. And so it's not easy to find them. I agree with that. But certainly going along in a business journey with people, in my experience, not only is more enjoyable, but typically can deliver better outcomes.
Yeah, my business coach and my current partner, Dave Carney, 15 years ago, he sort of said that this industry, financial planning, is going to evolve into hyper-specialisation as far as how it works. And I suppose years ago, it was that hard to get a client that you really were paranoid about letting them go, because everyone, to nick a medical term, everyone was a general practitioner. Okay, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but what's happened in the evolution of financial advice is that we are moving more towards, dare I say it, the medical one, where yes, you might be a fantastic a general practitioner and you might be great at counselling the person, but when you need those specialists, when you need the risk specialist or the estate planning specialist, we're a lot more comfortable now in actually sharing our clients for their overall betterment than we ever were. And most people have that in a sort of referral arrangement or just a professional arrangement. But from what I've read about your firm, that's something that's very entrenched in-house, and that you guys have your swim lanes. And maybe give me a feel for how the client experience is. Do you come in and do you leave, or what does the client feel about having these series of specialists from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great point, Roxy. And I guess I'll go back a step there just to say I hear you loud and clear with that. I think perhaps older styles of financial planning, as you've touched on, this is really a supply issue, isn't it? So in the past, you've got a client and you wouldn't dare sort of perhaps refer them out or not try and extract, if you will, or provide more opportunities or advice to them, even if perhaps you felt it might not have been in your lane. I think you've got to give to get, and you've got to go small to get big. And I think having a niche is huge. And you look at the American model, having your niche, as they say, and I'm sure your listeners to the American podcast would support this, is sometimes you've just got to understand that passing up an opportunity is actually better for you. And it actually is a win-win-win for everyone. It's a win for a client. It's a win for you. You get to do more of what you do better of. Frankly, you can have deeper engagements with the relative people around you. And then you're not distracted by various events throughout the way. I mean, I'm going on record to say that one of Angus's and Scott's favourite things is that they no longer have to do risk, or all the wealth specialists in our business. They don't have to touch it anymore. So I can really focus on my claims process, which is a big part of our offer. I can focus on having deep relationships with chief underwriters. I mean, you don't get direct lines to chief underwriters if you're sort of dabbling in lots of things. And I believe I get better claims outcomes for clients. I get better underwriting outcomes for clients because I live and breathe this discipline. And I would suggest to others that if it's something that you've got a passion for, really explore it, because I think it will come across to your clients. And don't worry about not being able to extract all the perceived value that you might get out of a client. It'll return it in spades. And everyone wins because you do more of what you love.
I suppose, look, it'd be wonderful to be able to speak to chief underwriters when you're very, very across the medical lingo. Maybe as just to impart some knowledge on that claims process. And a lot of people, we've done a lot of sort of material out there on how to get clients, how to curate that. But at the other end, at the real gritty end of being a life insurance advisor and looking after people's families, what are some of the what are your top sort of 2 or 3 things that you do at claim time that you'd be willing to share that makes a big difference to both from the insurer and the client side? And also, what are just the common things you see? Because you would pick up clients from other people over the years, or self-insured people. What are just the common mistakes? So maybe have a crack at those two, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Foxy. Well, the first thing I'd say, just going back to your point on CX, is that IMFG, every client gets a relationship manager. It might not necessarily be the risk advisor. It might not necessarily be our aged care specialist, but they've got a touch point, usually for someone that's introduced a client into the business, that stays throughout, so that they know they've got a team of people working around them. That actually is a great advantage for our advisors, knowing that it's not just them, that there is support for them when practical things like they go on leave or they're ill. And then a house of specialists come and dial in and out should it be required. This allows us to offer more intergenerational advice. It allows us to give the clients comfort to say, we actually aren't great in this space, so I'm going to roll in Matt, or I'm going to roll in Lizette, who's a guru in this space. I think that fills people with confidence because, again, it identifies the fact that you are vulnerable in certain advice areas. And I think it's okay to say that. And so that person is always across every piece of comms and detail for the client, which we think is important. And that extends then to my claims process too, Roxy. I think that's the most important thing. Get a lot of people involved in the process. The first thing is, if I think it's a clear-cut process, I actually have either an aged care specialist, if it's suitable, or a wealth specialist with me in that initial meeting. Because it could be that there are tax ramifications and wealth ramifications to any potential claim. I think that's an important point, along with one of my associates to be there.
So just to clarify, this is at claims, not at time of
at claims.
At claim.
At claims.
Okay.
At
Thank
claims,
you. Yep.
because I think it's important that the claimant and their family understand that we're not just coming at this from getting a successful claim proceeds perspective. We're coming at this from, this has been a large event in your life, typically, and I'll go on to the way we approach short-term claims shortly as well, Roxy. Secondly, you might need a team of people around you to make decisions around how it is that you're going to potentially invest this money, how you're going to deploy this money, what structure it's going to go to. You're going to take advantage of the financial planning benefit that still exists in so many claims.
Absolutely. And there's also, there's a risk that if you get the tax advice wrong and you're unadvised or ill-advised, you take a lump sum and before you know it, you've completely decimated the intention of the insurance.
100%. And there are occasions where at that point in time, I'll also bring the client's solicitor along to talk through that. But first things is I go and meet with the claims assessor and their manager.
Right.
I find that critical. Some people might find that that's
how do they respond to that? I mean, it sounds good, but I think we've got thousands of people who will be listening to this, and you've probably now got a lot of scared claims assessors, wondering how they're going to hire security guards and barricade the doors. So, I mean, clearly you've got a long relationship, but how do you position yourself in a calm and logical way so that you can have those meetings with those claim assessors?
100%. And of course, meetings aren't meetings in 21 and 22 and beyond, as you know, Roxy. I'm not necessarily meaning a face-to-face meeting, but certainly an opportunity to build a relationship via facial recognition with the claims assessor, subject to the claims manager's support. And in my experience with the insurers I work with, the claims managers are very supportive advisors who are part of the process and want to get to know the assessor and the process from here. I think just in the same way as you would embark on a relationship building exercise with a new client, we should treat every claim the same. The second thing is, are there ways we can expedite this for all? And I was part of a project back at AXA, Roxy, that talked about short, medium and long-term claims. And a lot of claims can be paid within the first 6-month period swiftly. It saves for admin costs, amongst many other costs that the insurer has to bear.
And just to specify, are you talking about lump sum, or you're talking about sort of income protection, or where do you make the distinction?
So I'm talking, as you know, trauma is quite binary, by and large, quite binary. Yep. So it's less perhaps negotiation, if you will, or it's rather clear cut. Was it partial or was it full? But talking more on an IP side of things, which is where I was previously a claims assessor. And I know if there is a way that we've got an advisor and a claimant on board who's open to coming to the table around a negotiation of what this could look like and save all parties across the table, it works extremely well. I have a lot of success with that. it might be that we forego what could have frankly been 1 month of partial payment or 2 months of a TD payment. But if we can simply get that done, it might be a 30-day wait, and save everyone the trouble, we move on. The claimant can move on. They see value in the protection. The claims department saves costs. So I'd really encourage people to roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty with claims departments. Go to a Luca. Get to know claims professionals. I know we continue to focus on the underwriters because ultimately that gets our clients' business across the door. But it's the claims end when you will really get ROI for all the work you've been doing. And yeah, sure, maybe I've got an advantage having been in claims myself in the past, but I'd encourage people to invest heavily there.
Oh, absolutely. And do you see, in my experience, we had many clients claim, and some of those clients claimed on advice and insurance recommendations that we had indeed done in the past, but other ones were claiming on products either bought directly through a group policy or previously done. And we had markedly different experiences. Do you get many of the latter to where you're doing claims for advice that was done not by yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I treat it exactly the same way. That's where you can earn some huge respect from the client. That's where that 1 to 5 existing client referral ratio will kick off. For every one claim I manage, I see it as a huge opportunity to help the client and ultimately to be an advocate for myself and my business, irrespective as to whether I was the advisor that initially provided the advice or not. Yeah, whether it's retail, industry, group.
And Dan, you don't have to answer this if you don't feel like it, but there's always been incidences of where lawyers have offered their services at a fee quite often that's either extremely excessive or very excessive for what they're doing. Where do you see any part of the claims process being where lawyers should get involved? Is there, or do you see that there should be a line in the sand? And I'm just after your thoughts on that particular subset of what goes on in the loosely defined financial services.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject matter. We could go on for a long time on this. Certainly, there are entire business models that are built around this. We probably won't go into that from various parts of the legal fraternity. I'm married to a lawyer and all of my in-laws are lawyers, Roxy, so I know enough to be dangerous in that world. But the reality is I do believe there are circumstances where early legal advice in the process does serve you, your client, and the insurer well. And I'm specifically talking about TPD, where there can be some ambiguity. And I know my sister-in-law is an excellent lawyer, and one area, and something she said to me many, many moons ago, is employment law is a ridiculously complex area that not even lawyers choose to dabble in. There are a lot of lawyers that are very specialised in this space. And I think that, to cite one example there, Roxy, is one area where if indeed there is some ambiguity around what's transpired, particularly with mental health in the workplace, I think that's an excellent place to get a trusted professional in the corner of you and the client.
Yeah, that is cracking advice. A lot of people who run their own small to medium-sized business in financial advice, they've engaged solicitors, and many of them have engaged employment solicitors, but that's quite often to assist in employment contracts or potentially disputes. What you're saying is when you're actually in the room talking to that employment lawyer, maybe you should have a coffee afterwards off the clock and say, well, if this circumstances arise, would you be interested in working with me to assist the client, particularly in a total and permanent disability sort of definitional process?
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say there is, we know a large part of the fact that disability lines are bleeding. I appreciate there's a lot of levers that are contributing to that, but a big part of it, as you know, Roxy, and your listeners would appreciate, is mental health. And I do a lot of work with one insurer around loading for mental health rather than excluding for mental health. And a lot of my clients are in that legal fraternity. And as you know, it's a sensitive subject matter. It's increasingly being discussed, and I think rightly so, particularly amongst the men's health cohort, which is something I'm passionate about. And State of Mind was a project that we ran in my time in Blatchy's Blues around getting men to talk more openly about their mental health. It's a huge area of interest for me. And I think the more work we can do to encourage underwriters to be more creative with the terms they offer, and then ultimately for claims assessors to be more creative, potentially with claims payments around mental health, and putting an individual's health front and foremost is just critical. So I think mental health in the workplace and where that could potentially be going with TPD is an area we can work closely with solicitors on.
I think you've absolutely impressed me in that area of specialisation. I mean, just having the courage to use the word creative when you're going through a financial planning process is actually really, really sort of invigorating. And you're right. I mean, everyone wants to have a solution, and sometimes you need to come to the table and work through things for the betterment of all parties, most importantly your clients. And I just wanted to
sorry, Rox, before I just push on, sorry mate, just quickly, one final thing I'll say there in the workplace is I run seminars within workplaces, and we all know how increasingly difficult it is to place retail business at the moment. We understand, certainly those that have been around for a while, understand how hard underwriting has become in certain facets, particularly in this COVID climate. One area that I'm incredibly passionate about and frankly I'm becoming quite successful in at the moment, and I'd encourage all your listeners to really give it a crack, is, get to know key decision makers of businesses, because group policies seem to be this forgotten, long-lost cousin. When I first started out, a great mentor of mine at AFRM spoke to me about the role of group cover, and I just still think a huge obligation of employers in this country is going to move, Roxy, on an evolution from, fruit bowls in the canteen, massages, over sort of frankly capitalised end-of-year parties and Christmas parties. I'm not saying go out and have a good time, but I think the future of employers and their obligation to their teams is going to be around not only financial advice, which we can all contribute to in various mediums, but understanding that we're remunerating our team for their work, but we're also protecting that remuneration and giving that confidence to their clients. I think GSC is a huge growth opportunity in this country. And again, being a specialist in that area just gives me the opportunities to talk more deeply with the group insurers, to talk more deeply with the HR Institute around how we can encourage employers to consider that more. I've been working with Ari around that, but I just encourage your listeners, really don't forget about group. You might not have got a policy on the books yet. You might feel like you're a bit at sea if you're recommending it. But if it is something that you want to consider, I encourage you to go and speak to key decision makers of businesses, because their staff will love them. It's a huge win. It's a benefit for employers and for employees.
And look, on that topic, Dan, I feel like that the engagement with group policies really has not been part of financial planning landscape for probably 10, 15 years. And in reality, it probably got phased out at the same time as corporate super did, where people would do a corporate super, they then engage, they'd do a seminar in the workplace, talk about things. But, as that unraveled for reasons that are good and bad, I feel like group policies were just sort of thrown in the same sort of dustbin as far as a business model. So, very interesting. And I imagine that there's probably a whole other sort of informative session that we could put myself on group policies, which would be, really well received. I just wanted to, change gears a bit. And you mentioned about mental health, and you mentioned about what you've done there in mental health. And truth be known, all the insurers in the Australian market are trying their best, and variously they're putting out great initiatives and great information and great data. But I suppose, what's your thoughts? Maybe take me through the state of mind project that you did do, and maybe even rewind back, because if I'm Googling your name, financial planning is not the first thing that comes up. Dan Blatch, aka Blatchy. So maybe take me through the roller coaster of how you got to become synonymous and the name of sort of sports fan, at least in the rugby league states, and how you then leverage that into doing something more purposeful. So maybe take us back to where that began.
Yeah, thanks, Roxy. And it is a good segue too, because I think it's got some deep identity. It's got some collegiate and community components to it. And, I was just having a whole bunch of fun, frankly, mate. Back on my 18th birthday, I just wanted to find a way to get together with all the lads without any other distractions. And so, bought 25 tickets. I saved up all my ice cream money. Bought 25 tickets from Ticketek. I remember it well. And I went to St Mary's Cathedral in town. And at lunchtime, you're allowed to duck out. So I ran across the Hyde Park, and I thought, what can we do to stand out, Roxy? And if you can recall, this is back in 1999. I know I'm showing my age, mate.
So just to clarify, the Catholic Church was also masquerading as a Ticketek. So is that what you're saying here? They've diversified revenue streams over the years. But anyway, carry on.
No, St Mary's Cathedral wasn't selling tickets to the Origin out the front, I can assure you. But, I just thought, how can we do this? And I thought, how can we stand out? And it was just before the Olympics, because this is 1999. And if you can recall, those wings that they had out there at Stadium Australia, as they called it at the time, the capacity was 118,000. I thought, gosh, I think it is still, other than the MCG game to this day, one of the records. But I thought, how can I stand out? And I thought, there's Gowings. I know what I'll do. I'll run into Gowings, the original department store. And I bought 13 navy terry toweling hats and 12 light blue terry toweling hats for the 25 of us, and insisted the lads, sort of sat one by one. And of course, how these things pan out, Roxy. We were in the nosebleed section. There was sideways rain. We were getting wet, and I don't think we had any sort of TV coverage. So I swore to do it better the next year, and I got 50 guys, and that's where the blue wig was born. I went to the party people down at South and Susie. I'm a St George boy, and bought 50 blue wigs, and we went and grew from there. And I said at our peak, I think we had about 18,500 people in there, taking sort of the whole bay down the south. But I learned so many wonderful lessons from that. And I think coming back to the community-minded mental health piece there was that, I say in my bio on our site that we really are social creatures, and ultimately we just want to be a part of something, all of us. And something that's still a bit of a frustration from mine is the seemingly sport and its desire to plaster up the white Anglo-Saxon 17 to 25-year-old bunch of guys inebriated, sort of screaming down the camera, which ultimately back then I was. But as I grew along and had a little bit longer, I realised actually it's about that person who doesn't have any friends, or who doesn't have anyone that wants to come together and belong and be a part of something. And it was quite an egalitarian model in that you didn't have to do anything. We didn't sing songs. You just threw a wig on, and you could be around a bunch of like-minded people.
Dan, it was more than that. I've been at State of Origin viewings where people are watching the TV wearing your blue wigs, and as you say, men who are historically relatively poor at sort of sharing and growing outside of a sporting sort of club, there. Getting together and sharing stories and whatnot is not normal. But I saw that was a large part of what you were doing. And I think the game was only just really a small component to the overall effect of it. So that's my take, an outsider looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, often we make things too complex. And an egalitarian approach should be all-encompassing and I think all supportive of people from different walks of life, not just men, but I think typically men in Australia have done not such a good job in opening up around that. So the State of Mind was a campaign that what's your state of mind, using the State of Origin sort of pun there, and being open to talking to other people about it. It's okay to talk about things if you're not doing well. And I think we're increasingly doing that. But ironically, tying back to our sort of work conversation is, interestingly, that's having an effect on claims, isn't it? So, who would have thought actuaries 10 or so years ago could have potentially seen this large wave of, particularly men, but lots of Australians talking about how they're feeling around depression, anxiety, stress, and some of the pressures that exist. So I hope COVID's a bit of a wake-up call for all of us around this. And I think some of the work I'm doing with underwriters around, and this is why, going back to your word creativity, can we be creative with our underwriting? Can we offer limited terms with a loading? Can we offer, it's not a blanket mental health exclusion, it only covers anxiety, or it only covers bipolar, not to be sort of blanketed with all of these exclusions and completely nutted out. It's a difficult conversation to have to exclude rather than to load.
And just the confidence in your knowledge in saying that is something that's not universal. It's not universal for advisors who might be doing life insurance as part of their overall holistic offering, or it might just be new advisors. So, it's we'd all love to have your brain and have done an OT degree and worked in hospitals, but we haven't. And getting back to that whole specialisation, what's apart from attempting to raise 4 kids under the age of 6 or 7, which would have been a lockdown delight, and a long-suffering wife, what are you up to these days, and where is your business at today, and where do you see the future for yourself?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Look, actually, I had a quiet champagne with my wife at New Year's, and we just reflected on the year that was. And it was probably the biggest year of our lives, really. Our business got our own Australian Financial Services licence. We put on 3 new advisors. We embedded as I say, I won the award. I had my 4th child under the age of 7. Unfortunately, my sister got breast cancer. I mean, we've all got these stories. So it was a monumental year for me. So the 30-second version of what I'm looking to do this year is just to have a slightly less busy year and continue to cherish my beautiful family, which I'm so fortunate to have, and hug them as much as possible. But what we've learned in our business is that if you're passionate like me about building assets, typically old financial planning has been, Dennis Denuto, above the butcher shop, battle with the leasing agent around negotiating your new lease. You might buddy up with the accountant or the mortgage broker. You're banging your head on the printer because the Dell printer guys, sold you a melon or didn't tell you about the colour printing charges, and you're taking the rubbish out as well. You're also the janitor. Oh, by the way, you need to do marketing, and everyone's telling you to do socials, and you need some support, and goes on and on and on. And particularly in our game, I've always said, if you don't like change, get out of financial planning. The only constant in this world is change, but it seems to be on steroids with financial planning. Get busy living or get busy dying. And what I've learned is it's just really hard on your own. It's really hard on your own, but there's typically been a gap. You've either got to be that Dennis Denuto above the butcher shop in the burbs, or you're part of sort of some behemoth, conglomerate. Where's the gap?
I'm not sure that Safe Harbour is defined as the vibe, but I'll let you keep referencing Dennis.
Yes, Dennis. The vibe. I love that scene. I love that scene when Eric Banner and his wife comes back and they're at Bonnie Doon and they're talking about the plane story. Oh, they gave you movies. There was movies, and they were free. Yeah, I love that movie. I think it just got voted Australia's best ever movie. Anyway, and the thing there sort of has been a gap. So we've recognised that we've built this model, which really we think is win-win-win. And I'm not just saying that. I do believe it's a very generous model, having seen it compared to many others, whereby advisors who might have been going out on their own, maybe they're considering self-employment, or they have been self-employed for a while, can operate under our business, sit on the client side of the table, knowing that they've got the confidence and sustainability that they're operating under an own AFSL holder. So they're always going to be sitting on the client side of the table, not the shareholder side of the table. It's part of the reason why we left IPAC and AMP. And also recognise that you can retain 100% ownership in your existing business. You can take advantage of a collegiate environment with a group of professionals who all want to grow together. Centralised admin functions, and then we grow together in a arrangement whereby new business is captured in a series of models. I won't go into that now, but what it allows people to do, Roxy, is have that asset that they've worked so hard to build or want to build, but not have to struggle with all that stuff that we do. The great picture of Angus Scott and I drinking a case of BB Throwdowns, because it was all we could get our hands on when we got our first lease at Goldfields House all those years ago. And we literally moved furniture from Angus's dad's business in the Lower North Shore, and Scott hired the truck. And, from our first hire, which was the shared admin support, God bless you, Leify, we still love you, mate, all the way up to our team of 17 now. What we've learned is it's just tough and really hard yakka on your own. And I say life's not a dress rehearsal, you've got to have fun along the way. And for a lot of people, building that asset comes with some trade-offs. And one of those trade-offs is you're on your own. It's really hard to sort of do on your own. So
it's one of the biggest sort of crazies is that the types of people who get into financial planning are quite often people who, back when they were at school and potentially at undergraduate uni and whatnot, they were, very, very talkative, very communicative, very interested in people, very interesting to people. And then, we've put them into a box that they didn't sign up for, especially if they're in small businesses. And from what I've seen, businesses have, a couple of early capacity hurdles. One's around that 10 employees. It's hard to get to 10. You muck around there for ages. And the next one's that kind of 30. And with that in mind, the decisions that you have to make on the operations of the business at 10 and 30 are different. You guys are halfway between. How do you feel that you're going? And is pushing through and getting that larger scale business, which hopefully will translate to, a quality delivery, your objective, or are you looking to consolidate what you've got now?
No, we're definitely looking for like-minded professionals that are committed to advice and have a runway. But frankly, just might be a bit tired of doing it all on their own. They're sick and tired of being the marketer, the janitor, the compliance guru, and et cetera, et cetera. I appreciate that there are different models and horses for courses, Roxy. Some people love the idea of being part of a boutique lifestyle, but there's certainly benefits, and I think that's pronounced in today's climate of scale. And so we're happy with where we're going. We're always building capacity, Roxy, but, they always say in business, you're never going as well as you think you're going, and you're never going as crap as you think you're going. And I sort of feel that going along the way, having fun along the way and building teams, people underestimate how challenging it is to build teams, as you rightly point out. And you know that only too well, that building award-winning teams, great places to work, you know that intimately well. It takes time. Curating a team of like-minded people, shared values is difficult. And there's certainly a capacity point when you're running your own show around that first hire, how it eats into your profit. And I think the key theme here is that old world financial planning, Roxy, might have been a firm, dealer group, AOR, these sorts of things. And new world, as your listeners will certainly attest, is professionalism, people, process, sustainable profit. And whether or not you're embarking on what I believe is my definition of a business, which is a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you or not, whether or not you're sort of destined to be that prof services employee, that's fine. But I certainly think there's benefit in partnering up with people to go on that journey. There's huge benefits in terms of business valuation, shifting from AOR values into EBIT, as we all know. But you've got to be with like-minded people to do that, because you see time and time again, culture and values going astray and not quite working out. And as you know, it's difficult to unscramble eggs. So you've got to take the time to get to know, like, and trust people. And once you've done that in business, the rewards are there. So certainly we'd encourage any of your listeners that want to have a coffee and engage in that conversation. We'd love to chat with them.
Oh, and Dan, on that note, whereabouts are you located? Which state or
we're in Sydney, Sydney CBD, and also we've got an advisor in Melbourne and about to appoint another advisor in Melbourne. So I'm at the 11th hour of talking to an advisor in Brisbane as well. So it's less about bricks and mortar and where you are. It's more about values, what your moral compass, how it's aligned, and your commitment to advice.
And Dan, look, I've had a real sort of treat today. It's when you peel back the onion layers, as one said, from the outset, you're a very joyous and your background indicates the fun and excitement. But there is a real sort of steely disposition to the passion of serving people in come claim time, and because you don't sell insurance for the fact of selling it, you sell it for the possibility and probability of actually doing the claim, and I think that's don't ever lose that passion, Dan. I'm sure that you're a hoot to work with, and I'd like to thank you for your time today. We didn't actually get round to the Guinness World Record, but maybe if you could give us the outclose of what your Guinness World Record is, and then I'll probably come at the end and say that's irrelevant to what you're delivering for us.
Yeah,
exactly. Of financial advice. So over to you.
Mate, there are some synergies there, believe it or not. It's a real hoot. I was flicking around with one of my partners. Those big Guinness World Record books? They're massive. They're sort of doorstops, and I was flicking around sort of before it was online and having a look. And believe it or not, there was a category. Couldn't believe it. It was destiny, Roxy. There was a category which had already been achieved. Most number of people wearing wigs in a stadium. Can you believe it? I was like, what is this? Anyway, it was held by a billionaire. I think he's a billionaire who owns the Los Angeles Angels. He owns a number of sporting sort of businesses and clubs around the world.
We now refer to him as First Loser.
Yeah, well, it's so funny. I'm having a lovely battle with him over the years, and he held it for 8,500 people in an LA Angeles game. And I thought, we can do this. We can definitely do this on the numbers we had. And, I started to begin, it's harder than it thinks, Roxy. I had to engage an army of volunteers to count no more than 100 seats. But during the first 5 minutes of the game, you had to sort of have it verified. It was quite a project. And again,
can I ask, did you have Donald Trump's people who count crowds, or did you have a sort of a more of an independent arbiter?
1, 2, miss a few. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we eventually got it done, and the final number was 12,800, I think it is, and got the award presented on the ground, and that was just so much fun. And then this is the best bit of the yarn, talking about vulnerability, being put in your place. 9 months later, Roxy, word gets out that this Los Angeles guy who owns a zillion clubs has found out he's lost this award. His marketing team has said, hang on, Bob, what's happening here, Anyway, the next home game, he gives everyone a red wig. Everyone, all 36,000 LA Angels fans that came in got a red wig. And so I only held it for 9 months or something like that. But talk about being a one-man band against a billionaire and attracting his attention.
You've had 9 months of the peak there and sort of 25 solid years in financial planning. I'd like to thank you for your time, Dan. It was always going to be a hoot. And if people want to reach out to you or anything you've said there, there'll be plenty of links, and they can always reach out to the good team at XY Advisor. But with that in mind, thanks for sharing your story and your passion, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Cheers, Dan.
Thanks, Roxy. Amazing. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate the opportunity. Cheers, mate.